Okay, so we've got the Hades here. I've already seen plenty of unboxings, but the last Spring Air, well, I guess technically the Kronos. Whoops, already busted that. The last non, I guess, sidearm Rival Spring Air blaster that I bought was the Apollo, way back when the series first debuted. So I was interested in the Artemis, but there were... Why didn't I buy the Artemis? I guess, I don't know, having to clutch together a stock mounting point. I think there were some reported issues with performance. Was it the capacity? 30 rounds was fine. To be honest, I don't really have much of an excuse not for buying the Artemis. I think I just didn't get around to doing it. But when they announced the Hades, which was essentially a double Artemis, I had a hard time passing up on that one. The big drawback to this one, I'm going to say right now, is the retail price. So all of these Hasbro blasters are going up, up, and up in price. And paying 70 bucks for a Spring Air, you know, even with the capacity that it has, it's kind of getting into that territory where obviously there are always the cheaper options, so you can't really complain too much about that. But the price on these things is starting to get a little bit out of control. I mean, it'll be interesting when the Hasbro releases a Spring Air blaster that doesn't have motors in it, close to 100 bucks. I don't know if that day will ever happen. I think 70 is pretty much where it's topping out, but when the primary thing that you're talking about that makes it worth that $70 retail price is, hey, it holds 60 balls, which is, I think currently right now you can get 100 balls, Nerf Ram balls, for about 20 bucks. So 60 rounds, you know, what, it's like a little more than $10 worth of balls. So you're paying, what, about 60 bucks for the blaster itself. Yeah, again, this is kind of Hasbro. They can do their business however they want. But we are kind of getting into that rich kids territory when these toys start to cost more and more, which I think is maybe not really the point of have fun and play. All right, that foregrip is really fat. And the shouldering, this little round point here, it kind of wants to roll off the shoulder, but it does give you something to brace against. So, okay, that's the up. Wow, that is a really, man, I know I complained about the bitiness and the springiness of the safety on the Hades, not the Hades, the Kronos. But this one, wow, this is just like that is just like the sloppiest safety I have ever seen on a Nerf blaster. So, at least with the Kronos, it had this click feedback. Yes, I'm using my aftermarket whatever safety, but even when it had the stock piece on there, even though it was stubby and short and had these serrations in it, it still had that same positive feedback click so that you knew whether it was down or up. And this one here, on the other hand, is like, it's like made out of spaghetti. It's just like this floppy, wet noodle thing that I'm gonna swap the spring out of this, but this has got to go. And I know I'm probably harping on the safety thing too much because most people just don't even bother with them at all, but it's bothering me. The time action is totally smooth, so if we put a K26 in there, assuming it fits like it does in the Artemis, then it'll be a little bit more to muscle, but with that leverage, I mean, this is like a one-finger primer. So that's great. I should probably run it over the Chrono to see what kind of performance it gets. We would like to see Apollo type performance, which is, you know, high 90s. I think, yeah, maybe I'll do that. But yeah, initial impressions, other than that crappy safety and the kind of chunky fat grip, the pistol grip is fine. The trigger, it kind of has this bladed whatever kind of cut in it, which is a little bit, it's okay if you hit it with the pad of the finger. It might be a little less comfortable if you do it in between the joint, which you generally, that's generally frowned upon when you're shooting. But if you use the pad, that's okay. I wouldn't bother changing that out. Just this and this. I don't know how hard it's going to be to pull that out, but I would like to have maybe an angled foregrip instead, like on the Caliburn. And as for the rounded buttstock, I think rather than modeling something or making some big end cap that fits on the end, probably just putting some rubberized grip tape on the end would keep it from sliding off the shoulder. So let's crack this open, model the safety, replace this, because in order to open the blaster up to replace the spring, we're going to have to take that off anyway. And I guess before that, we'll run it over the chrono real quick and see what type of performance it's getting so that we have a baseline before swapping in the K26. Oh, that's 10. And for that 10-shot string, it was a little bit lower. I think it's because I'm a little bit further away from the chrono than I was for that initial test. But if you take a look, it's average 85, and that's 79 to 88. Now with the initial string, I was getting average 89.9, so 90, about 90 flat, and that was from 99 to 74. What we have in here right now is K26, and that gives you about 25 feet over stock, 25 feet per second over stock. I was getting about 90 feet per second on the chrono, which was pretty disappointing. But with a K26 spring in there, which was trimmed down for a Kronos, not for a any other blaster. So I think it's about 12 coils if you're buying or using out of darts K26 springs. I don't know how those compare to the ones that you get direct from McMaster Car, but if you have a pre-cut spring for the Kronos, it will fit in the Hades. All right, so now if you saw what I did there, I had to pop that out because there are 2 screws. This piece here is from Tungsten EXE, and it allows you to move the forward grip, the priming grip, back, in addition to mounting whatever you want onto the Picatinny/Weaver rail. Now, given the size of this blaster, I'm actually kind of surprised that it did not have more fasteners holding everything together. But, and don't even bother taking that off. It's just not necessary for this modification. And to be honest, there is really no benefit in removing the slide cover. Now, you could take that out and try and shave or modify the followers so that you can squeeze in an extra 3 balls, but it already holds 63, and frankly, holding 3 more is not really worth shaving the followers, which could potentially disrupt the feed, since the springs were designed for holding that 20 balls in there. But, you know, if you want to do it anyway, give it a shot, then by all means. Everybody can do things the way that they want. Alright, we are almost out here. Oh, for the grip. The grip on this one is a lot easier to remove than the one that they had in the Artemis. So all you have to do is remove these 2 screws and spread that apart. and you can see that you can pull it off like that. Now there's a U molded piece of plastic here. There's no reason to take that off. So it comes off of the priming arm real easily. All right, we got two more in the end cap. And the thing that's kind of nice about this end cap is it's not molded into the main housing. So if somebody wants to design a better butt cap, which was one of two gripes that I had about the Hades, they can. All right, I think that's almost all the fasteners. Come on. So the only two functional parts of the Hades that I didn't particularly care for out of the box was the safety, which was really mushy. It's been slightly modified, but you can tell that the internal hasn't actually been replaced. It's still floppy. You can kind of hear it click into place, and I modified the inside so that unless it's fully down, the trigger will pop it back into the fire position. And that's to prevent it from accidentally going into safety mode. Okay. So that's pretty much it for removing the outer shell. And the safety is here. So you can see that the problem here is that it doesn't really reach fully, and that these pieces here are held in place by friction pegs, and unfortunately that allows it to wobble freely. So not the best design, but I know that a lot of people don't even bother with the safety to begin with. So you can just take this piece out completely and not have to worry about it at all. If you wanted to modify it, this would probably be my candidate, because it would be the quickest piece to print, and it would be the fastest way to get through a bunch of different versions without wasting a lot of time. So the way that you would probably go about doing that is extend that out and make that a little bit longer, as opposed to redesigning this part, which would be more difficult to do. All right, so now that we've got it open, everything can more or less be accessed. Let's move that out of the way, move that out of the way. And if you remember, we started with the slide door, or the access port, whatever you want to call this. And originally it was kind of annoying that they had that in there, but I'll be honest with you, it's not that big of a deal. It's kind of like that little retention screw that they put in the Kronos that holds the inner part of the slide on. Now everything can come out. Pay attention to where everything is lined up. When you're inserting this, make sure that it's in the track. For whatever reason, the way that they designed this, it's very easy for the detents to go into the grooves. So when you're putting it back in, just make sure it's in there, and that way it stays on the track to make the mechanism work properly. This piece here, take a look at how it fits in place up in the front, like so. Okay, and in order to get access to your cup, you do need to take that off. Now at this point we can just remove this up And we can set the case aside altogether. We don't need this, we don't need that. Get back to it later. So this is your internal mechanism. And from here, we need to take these screws off. Should probably put that in frame. And usually I don't do these one shots, but I had so many clips as I was doing exploratory surgery on this blaster that, okay, note this little spring here. You don't want to lose this guy. It goes inside that little cup. And there is a reciprocating peg here that it goes into. So make sure you keep track of that, because the mechanism will not work properly without it. So this goes with the pegs down like that. And now we have access to the cup. And if you notice, I have a modified air restrictor remover in there. I did not test it with the piece in there. I could probably swap in the stock piece and put it back. You can alternately cut the outer ring out. This is made out of TPU. I can throw the file up if people want it, but if you print this out of PLA, it will shatter. So TPU, flex filament, Ninja Flex, whatever you want to use it. It will keep the ball aligned in the chamber, but it allows for better airflow. And I think the only other modified Hades that I've seen also reported between 110 and 120. So I don't think that it makes that much of a difference, to be honest. In the Kronos, it makes a pretty significant difference. If you do the K26 with the air restrictor in there, I was getting, I think, 110, if I remember correctly. And then when I modified the air restrictor, which incidentally, this air restrictor removal will work in the Kronos as well, then I was getting like 130 to 140 feet per second using this exact same spring. All right, so the other thing in here holding this together is, if you look, there you can see it, that little black dot. That's the one last screw that you need to access to pull this off. And there is a little bit of gymnastics getting that guy back in there, so be forewarned. That's the least accessible screw in this blaster, not the ones that are covered by the ports. So once that's out, this can now pop out like that. And now we have access to the spring, which you can see had PTFE tape that I'm thinking now I may just remove because it can interfere with the seal. So there are ways to improve that seal, I think. In fact, maybe you could do a O-ring upgrade. That might work. Now, if you'll notice, let's see if I got that spring. Here it is. So this is the stock spring right here. The outer diameter is a little bit wider than the K26 from Out of Darts, but the diameter of the spring coils themselves, the wire, it's a little bit narrower. So what that means is that it compresses further than the K26. And what that means is you can't use a longer piece of K26 in there because it won't compress all the way to cycle the action fully. Now this is 12 coils. You might be able to go up to 13, maybe 13 and a half. I don't know. I'm not gonna bother experimenting with that. But if you go up to 13 coils, maybe you can get a little bit more velocity out of it. I don't know. But the easiest way to drop it in, you can see it's a little bit shorter. The easiest way to do this is to use a mod spring that was made for the Kronos. And again, that'll give you between 110 and 120, which is not a huge bump. But given that out of box, it was only giving me about 90 feet per second average. It gives you usable velocity, we'll put it that way. All right, so let's get this back together. since all I did was modify the, all I did was take out the, whatever, PTFE tape. Okay, so that goes in here. This is going to go back here. I'm used to looking at it this direction. Okay. This goes here. What am I doing? Okay, goes here. These pegs go out like this. Make sure that this is inside the track. Like so. There we go. Okay, so that should move freely. This is the tricky part. If you remember, this piece needs to go on here and in here, like so. And it needs to go through here. So watch how this works. Okay, so that's now in there. Hopefully that was visible in the camera. And then we need to get access to that screw port. I think what I'm going to do here are do this to get that in place. Okay. And you don't need to tighten that thing down. In fact, I don't recommend torquing it because what will happen is it'll come through the top. You don't want that. Now make sure that this peg here is going into this clear part of the cup that's probably not showing on frame. Get that guy racked back. Okay. And all right, that looks good. That looks good. Let's get this the internals back in place. There's 3 line on there. That lines up there. Now, yeah, probably be easier if we do it like this. So bad camera angle, but again, that piece goes on there. Remember that spring? That spring has to go in here, otherwise the advancing mechanism won't work properly. This was the other guy that did not really want to stay well in place. So between getting that screw that was holding that piece in and this, I would say these are the 2 trickiest pieces to get into position. Everything else is relatively straightforward. Okay, so that's lined up. And make sure that that spring stays in the cup. Otherwise, you are going to have issues with the rotary mechanism. Okay. All right, we lost one of the screws. Okay, this is going in here, and I was trying to get this done a little bit faster, but maybe I can do a little bit of editing to speed this up because I know not everybody's going to want to watch the full. It's probably going to be 20 minutes by the time I get this together, maybe a little bit more. There was one more screw in here. Where did you go? There you are. Yeah, this is why working on a black mat is not necessarily the best way to go. These black fasteners, although usually the fasteners are silver metal, so. Okay. A little bit of torque. If you want at this point, you can re-grease the O-ring. All right, so that's back in place. I think we got everything there. Yep, we're good. I'm gonna drop this in here. Remember how this one came in play? That's gonna go here. Rotate that and it drops in place. Okay, get this piece here. And I think all we got left is, yeah, some of the additional pieces. Again, check the alignment to make sure that it's inside the grooves when you put it in there. And unfortunately, you can't rotate it because that's not the way that the mechanism works. It goes alongside this track. And that was, of course, borrowed from the Artemis. All right, this would be the point where, you know, I'm just gonna deal with that crappy safety, and I'm gonna leave it in there. Now, what you can do to make it a little bit easier to work is, if you notice, this has been shaved, and I think I left that side alone. And then I also shaved this here. Usually I don't like modifying internal parts rather than, you know, just replacing them, remodeling them, but I don't want to spend too much time on this blaster, I'll be honest with you. I wasted a lot of time on the Kronos, and I don't know whether that was actually worth my time. So this right here will make it easier for the fire position to engage. So this is the safe mode, like that, and then that's the fire mode. And you can see how there's just not a lot of positive action there. Okay, so let's see. There are two ways of doing this, and the way that I'm going to do this is going to be off camera. So remember, we need to get this place here. This piece needs to go back on. So we've got one screw. You'll see the other side, so just remember that there's the screw on the reverse side. I'm doing this holding with one hand while I'm screwing with the other. So probably not the best way of doing this, but it works. All right, so that's in there. And we're gonna get the top back on. Okay, oop, we need to make sure we got that tack rail in there, yeah. Okay, tack rail's in place. I think that's the last piece. All we have left are the covers. So, remember, this guy goes here. At this point, also, you could be replacing your butt pad. Rather than remodeling this thing, although I would like to see some people tackle that, what I'm probably just going to do is put some adhesive grip foam on the back, and that'll keep it from rolling off the shoulder. Okay, let's hold that in place. And I'm going to screw everything together in a chaotic fashion, out of order, so that I forget one of the screws and it falls out when I try to prime the blaster. All right, let's get this guy in there. Put that in there, put this in here, and that's back in place. And I'm not seeing any additional parts, so that's always a plus. So those are the only two screws on the flip side of the blaster. And I'm going to edit this guy down to try and get it down to 20. Okay, if it jams up like this, just reset that. And now you're good to go. Sounds a little harder. That's because the air restrictor has been removed. And let's just run a few rounds off the chrono with the reassembly to see if the numbers are still at that 110 to 120 level. Yeah, we'll do 3 more. I can't count. I think that was 3. All right, so we've got, that was a string of 3. And we've got an average of 112.7, max 122, and min 2. Okay, I think we can throw that one out. And if we threw that one out, let's stop this. I'm kind of curious. I don't like to manipulate data here, but I don't know, maybe if I watch the video, it'll show me a ball roll out of the barrel. That's entirely possible. Okay, so with that adjustment, with that 2 thrown out, the average is 115.2, and that's from 107 to 122, which is more realistically what you would expect to see. So again, yeah, between 110 and 120, which is definitely a lot better than the 90 FPS. So from there, it makes it playable. And you decide for yourself whether that is worth your 70 bucks and about $1 to $2 worth of spring.